So super excited for us to always come together. I get really encouraged preparing for these because I see your faces and I see all the stories that you've shared whenever we come together, how you each bring your own anecdotes and your own questions, and I'm like, this is what we're here to do, is to influence one another and the people around us, ideally in a positive way, right? And so just want to thank all of you for being here and for journeying along. Like, there's a lot of conversations that many of us have had between sessions and just about your own journeys and things changing in your workplace or in your status or in your home. And it's so incredible to see how God moves and weaves through us in the in-between times. And so I just want to thank you for sharing your stories and just showing excitement for these leadership nights. It's super exciting for me, and I'm glad to share tonight with you. Tonight we're talking about the heart, and much to Donovan's point, I don't know if you've ever found this, but when you know you're going to talk about a topic, the Lord's like, hold, before you speak about it, you better have some things that are fresh in heart to bring up, or just to kind of push the point. And so as I think about the heart, someone really close to a couple of us here went in for heart surgery last week, and it's a big deal, like a big deal. And it made me kind of sit down and go, like, what do you have to say about the heart? Like, while this person that leads me is in a hospital and healing, and he's going through physical heart mending, what is it? Like, I just felt so drawn to look up things about the heart, and ended up not tabbing my Bible by the books, but by heart verses, and going, there's a lot. And then I'm reading, I was like, that one wasn't on the list. And as I've done this, I'm going, I wonder if, as this leader is going through this physical heart change, how the sheep are going through their own heart surgery, renovations, and the like. And just realized this week there's a couple things that came up where I've had people who were speaking into me and said, hey, I noticed these sort of undertones in your speech over the last couple of years, wondering if there's some bitterness in your heart. And I'm going, what? No. Like, and I realized the heart, it's where things are hidden. I don't think we always know what's in there. We don't know our motives, but we think we know. We think what's in our heart is what we think, but it's not. And so today we're going to kind of deep dive into, like, those values, those things that we harbor here, and why does God call us to protect our heart? Because there's actually a lot that comes out of it that we're not even aware of. Another example, I mean, this was like day one. Someone's like, I'm noticing that these patterns of speech, maybe you'll need to, maybe you should address it. And I'm like, I didn't realize that. Like, thanks for bringing it to my attention. Then the next day, lead another group, and a couple people canceled last minute, and I was like, why am I so perturbed by this? Like, why does it bother me so much? And there was a I think a deep heart thing. It's like, am I being rejected? Is it personal? And then sometimes that things in the heart, if I'm like, let my yes be yes, and other people don't, of course, generally they always have valid reasons, but it challenges us, right? And I'm like, oof, I need to address this. Why am I scared to address this? They could bring up how I'm a bad leader. I'm like, well, where's that coming from? I mean, it's just like, right? It perpetuates. And I'm like, geez, I really have to address this. If I want to be a good leader, I need to both receive input and be able to give it out. And I realized somewhere in the middle, it's like, I'd rather do neither, right? Sometimes we'd rather, you don't want feedback unless you know it's going to be good stuff.
Come on.
Right? And then on the other side, I don't want to hurt people. And as I talked to someone about this, she's like, Taisa, if people know your intentions and they know who you are, they're not going to take this bit of correction or you bringing things to the light as hurt. They'll be like, this is your job to do this, and they're looking for you to do it in a timely way. And so all of this, I was like, okay, let's dig into this hard stuff. Let's go. So I'm excited. I feel like he's been priming probably all of us, not just for today, but for years and decades of leadership to follow. Because last time, what did we talk about? Leadership is all about what? If it could boil it down to one word, what might we say?
Influence.
I'm sorry, can I hear that louder?
Influence.
Yeah, Jesus is always the right answer. It boils down to influence. Influence. You're not wrong. So it boils down to influence, and we talked about 2 types of roles. So I'm just going to give a primer of our first session. We talked about 2 types of roles. Your life roles. Amy is my friend. I have Darby's my roommate. I have parents. I'm a sister. I'm an auntie. These are life roles. They're with you generally for the long haul. You can't really walk away from them. Generally, these are the types of roles in your life that have the biggest impact because they're highly relational. Then we have organizational roles. You are a boss. You manage a facility. You're a pastor, a worship leader. You own a business. I'm a worker. These are roles that are often given to us. They're earned. We're generally paid for them. There's generally criteria of performance. Kind of different. One's highly relational, one is organizational. But we hold both of these roles, and we have a choice. So both of these roles, we can influence or affect others in our actions. We can do this in a number of ways. So one might be specific. This dictator is hoarding millions of dollars, right? You can have positive or negative influence, but your actions matter. You can be just general actions. You're taking care of your child as a mom. That's leadership. It can be covert influence. So a pastor not addressing a particular issue, avoiding it from the pulpit. That's actually a decision that can influence people. Overt, officially taking an unpopular stance on a topic. So our actions, sometimes people don't even know that they're being influenced by what we do, what we say, but we have a choice. Our actions will influence people. Second, we have a choice. The choice comes in, what kind of influence do you want to have? Are you trying to suck as much energy and everything out of people, or are you here to serve? Are you here to lead like Jesus? And we talked about Jesus was like, not so with you. The last shall be first, and you shall come to serve, not kind of lead for yourself. So as a leader, you affect or influence others in multiple ways, but you're also involved in that personal choice of how you use your influence and to what end. That's really what we covered. And so as you look at this circle, which sort of begins our journey today, that inside is the idea that we can't lead others well unless we know who we are and whose we are. And whose are we?
Jesus.
That's right. Yeah. And who are you comes down to what did God create for you on earth, right? What did he call you to do? So it's all about perspective. And so we're still in that journey of understanding our own hearts and our life purpose, because that's going to impact the way that you lead, who you're chatting with, the people that you're called to influence. And then as you can lead yourself well, then I'm building trust with people around me. I'm leading one-on-ones. Then it goes into a wider group. I'm become trustworthy in my one-on-ones. I'm able to lead larger groups. This is what Jesus did. He had one-on-ones. Then the disciple built greater trustworthiness with his followers, was able to lead groups. And then we have this organizational, that's the wider circle, leading an organization. And that's all about honoring diversity, building community, essentially changing the atmospheres where you are called to be is really what that highest level is. But first, we've got to know whose we are, who we are, and all about this thing that seems pretty hidden called the heart. So that's where we're going today. And so this session is called Transformational Leadership, Embracing the Heart. Is it inspiring enough for you?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm in.
You're in. Okay. So when you think about leadership books, what do they tell you? Like, I'm sure you've all read something. What do leaderships tell you to do?
Be assertive.
Be assertive.
Be a boss.
Be a boss.
Get what's yours.
What kind of books are you reading?
Yeah, we're
Books, these are the...
gonna roll with it because it works.
Guys, sorry, it was a setup.
It was a
Jeremy
did
knew,
set
you
up.
told me.
I didn't pay him for that. I didn't pay him for that.
Craving donuts, but he did.
But ultimately, it's all about behavior change. These books are, if you do this, then you can attract people. If you speak like this, they'll like you more. If you use their name, they're going to have an affinity to you. It's all about this type of influence based on changing our behaviors. But we know darn well you can want to go to the gym and not go to the gym unless you have a good enough motivation to go to the gym. Like, at the end of the day, our heart needs to change, our motivations need to change for us to actually have effective leadership change, right? And that's what this is about, is how do we adjust and understand the motivations of heart that guide all of our actions and all of our behaviors. So Amy, do you mind reading out that Proverbs 4:23?
Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's true. And I think reminding people that, like, hey, you have influence. This just goes to show how quickly we go, oh, the world would say that this is what a leader looks like. I'm not that. I'm not a leader. And God's like, what? Stop it. Like, stop listening to that. I've told you what to do. I've told you that you're called to the places you're called to. I've given you a vision for your life, or you're to walk with God and just kind of figure that out with Him as we journey with Him. But it's so from the enemy, right? To be like, oh, I'm not a leader. Actually, yeah, every day you're influencing people, every day. So even, I could close the blinds, but the neighbors are always watching. I'm like, yeah, make them be curious. Right? Like, sure, why not? It's these small decisions we make, and the Lord leads us in that. So I purchased this home because I felt a strong desire to host, because this house is a house of peace, and I desire that people experience the peace of God when they're in my house. And like maybe 10, 15 years ago, when I used to host small groups in China, one day the Lord said, and I think I've shared this, do not filter, when it comes to my small groups, do not filter who comes through that door. Whether it's 2 people or whether it's 15, don't worry about it. And you know how much, then I was like, it was never about performance. I never cared about numbers. Never cared, because I was like, oh, one person, let's go. Let's dig into the Bible. Because it's like, the Lord gave a word, that's all I needed. And so when pastors go, oh, we're smaller numbers, everyone's at exams, I'm like, come on, the people that are here. Let's go. I mean, they want to acknowledge that the people that aren't there are missed, but at the same time, I'm like, it's fine. It's fine. There's obviously space for introspection, but I think when the Lord gives a word, and it can sometimes just adjust our motivation for no, this is what you said, this is how I'm going to run this. And it could be for the one person that stops, or it can be for 10 or 100. I don't know. But exactly. We're always influencing. So when it comes to the heart, this is really where our motivations lie. This is where our why lies. So it is worth asking and examining and guarding. And so often I think we read that, guard your heart, and we think, oh, from, bad girls, bad guys. But no, it's from anything kind of taking God's space, because so I think the world might deduce the heart to loving someone from the opposite sex, or but really guarding our heart is because that's where our motivation and our why springs from. Our beliefs impact how we deal with challenges. So consider, Donovan, that was a great example, a challenge that you've had where you're examining, where's God in this? So I would love for you just to close your eyes, and I'm going to ask you a couple questions. So if your beliefs are set in your heart, they will set in motion your why. But consider a situation right now that you find challenging. It's difficult. Has it challenged aspects of your faith? It probably has. I'm going to ask them questions and just see how strong these convictions might reside within your heart, because they'll mold not only your identity, but also influence other connections in your life. So consider this situation and ask, is God inherently good? Do I hold the belief that He has a specific plan and purpose tailored to my life? Am I entertaining the notion that anyone or anything has the power to alter God's intended course for me? Am I convicted that God harbors a profound love for me? Do I trust in the assurance that God will use every facet of my existence for His glory and for my well-being as He promised? Am I able to confide in Him with every intricacy of my life? I want you to open your eyes. For how many of you was there maybe a question or two where you're like, maybe not? Yeah? Can anyone share an example of maybe like,
Sure. The ones about like God's will, because I feel like a lot of that has to do with our willingness to partner with Him in that. And so maybe He's like, yeah, I'm waiting for you to get your act together and go do this.
so are you saying that in your life you feel like one hindrance might be you? Or like,
Well, in relation to that one question, yeah.
anyone else?
Excuse me.
I'm going through a work situation that's pretty difficult, and today I was like, God, do you even know what you're doing? And then Donovan sent me a message. It was like so timely. That spoke right to it, and so I didn't linger there long, but yeah.
Awesome. So these questions, I think different situations can challenge us in different ways, but they're worth sitting down with when you're going through something, because as you identify, if you don't believe that God is inherently good, that's going to skew your perspective on almost everything. So that one is pretty paramount for us to work through. The one that I sometimes struggle with is, do you entertain the notion that anyone or anything has the power to alter God's intended course for you? My argument with that, oh God, what if I can't hear you? I'm confused. Can you really get through? Like, can you? But I think it's going to look a certain way, and it doesn't. And then I go through this struggle, and I need to make decisions I don't want to make. You know, and then I realize after, oh, the Lord was totally in it. But I wanted to jump the gun and not deal with the discomfort. But I think so often it's the pressure on the heart that makes us go through this. So I just share these questions because this isn't here, right? I could ask you, do you think God? Yep. Is He all powerful? Yep. But then when you really nail it down to a situation, I'm going, oh, I'm believing the lie that you can't actually come through and you don't actually care about me as much as that person. And, you know, and bring those things to the Lord. Because it is the enemy to want us, for our hearts to be self-serving. So that's great that the body can encourage and that you were able to encourage him. So if a quick flip of the scriptures says love is stored here. 1 Peter 1:22. Forgiveness is from the heart. Matthew 18:35. Words are banked in our heart. In the heart, we seek and find God. So no wonder we are told to guard our hearts. Our behaviors can't change until the heart changes. And leading like Jesus really begins with a heart change. So what does it actually look like? Brandon, can you read Matthew 22:37-39? It's just that next section.
Okay, yep. Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself."
Awesome. And Amy, can you read number 1?
Where's it?
You guys have different, yours is a different shape.
Under key concept 1.
Or key concept 1.
Love-based leadership in action.
Yes. Continue. Yeah, read the next one.
Are you wanting the points or the subscript? If there's
Um,
a blank in that subscript.
oh yeah, you can guess it.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, happily.
Appreciate
We'll
it.
help you, don't
You're
worry.
so welcome.
What does your heart have to do with leadership? Everything in the heart is our...
Any guess?
Jesus.
Yeah. Responsibility.
What do we think that is? Suda, you mentioned it earlier. It's related to our motivation. It's our attention. It's our why. To put simply, it's our why. Right? Like, why are you here? Why do you do what you do? Heidi Baker has a really great, she says, love always looks like something. And I love this because it means that like our love in action is really what leadership is about. However, I think for a lot of Christians, what do we think about when we say, love your neighbor, or love and leadership? What comes to mind? Is it service,
Cookies.
cookies? So I think what's interesting about this, and it's definitely worth mentioning, is this isn't the soft type of love where it's everyone can walk over you, you're doing everything that everyone else wants you to do. This is not a love that is devoid of strategic insight, like with goals in mind. It's not a love that neglects, that strategic thinking and fails to focus on results. I think so often we can go to one extreme and go, love at the expense of yourself and just do everything and be nice and then you end up feeling like a doormat. When Jesus wasn't like that at all. Like, he loved, but he still had these boundaries of, like, he wasn't about to neglect what he's called to do, which is to bring people and make them more like him, which required some discipline. It required some things that weren't as lovey-dovey as we'd always say. So when you think about love, think about both sides. It's the loving on people well, while also having that strategic mind. How are you going to serve well? How are you going to lead well? We're going to be ineffective leaders, to be honest, if all we're thinking about, I'm going to do everything everyone wants from me, get into people pleasing. That's not effective leadership at all, and that's not what Jesus did. So when we say love here, let's look at what he says in 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7. Love is what? Patient. It does not self-seeking, doesn't boast, it's not easily angered, it takes no record of wrong. So this is a type of love that's it's relational. So we are called to be in relationships with people for what? To not leave them or keep them as they are, but to help lead them and influence them into being who Christ made them to be. That's really what leading like Jesus actually looks like, and loving like them. So if Amy sees a behavior in me that she's like, that ain't good for you, what is more loving according to 1 Corinthians 13? Is it to say nothing? Is it to walk with me? Is it to say anything? What do you think?
To call it out.
Yeah, to call it out in love. And these types of relationships are what really last the test of time. It's when Jeremy's calling out Donovan, Donovan's calling out Jeremy, you love each other, you're watching a hockey game together, 2 months later, you're going through a hard time, this is what it's about. And I think as a leader, this is something I sometimes struggle with, because there's this fear, I don't want to hurt people. But at the same time, I'm like, but this behavior is a pattern. And they're constantly in the ditch because of this thinking pattern. It has to stop. And I feel like lately, probably over the last 4 or 5 months, the Lord has given me such a boldness to go, that's a lie. Like, that's going to have to change first. What this is bogus. You can try doing all of these things, but until this is addressed, none of this is going to get ordered. And it's like from the Lord, because that's in love. It's not. But I think often we can just, it's fine. And let's just be peaceable. But we forget the Lord has put people in your immediate circle to speak life into. And it tastes like honey, or it feels like honey, probably after a few days, not necessarily right away. But biblically, I found some verses.
It's sticky first.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It does not feel good. It's like, I'm such a disappointment. And then you're like, okay. So at the heart of leading in the manner of Jesus is this love. Leadership modeled after Jesus involves that connection with people, relationships, and outcomes. The outcome that we desire when we walk with people is that they are brought closer to Christ through our influence, and vice versa. Right? That we are what do they call it? Not the thermostat, the other one.
We are the thermostat.
We are the thermostat?
Not the thermometer.
Yeah. We're the thermostat, not the thermometer.
What's the difference?
One measures and one emits heat. So I want to be able to go into a room and influence versus go into an environment where I'm being influenced by the language that people speak, by the words, by the gossip. That would be the difference. So when we look at this type of leadership in action, I think about it's aligning our values with how we operate and work with people. You look at leaders like the CEO of Chick-fil-A, Christians. They've brought their values into the workplace. They fundamentally impact all employees by them being closed on Sundays. Why? The value is that they should have a day off to Sabbath, and if it's their choice, to worship the Lord on that day. So this is when we take it to the extreme in the workplace, where you go, actually my values are going to guide the way that I even establish my business or my classroom, it could be whatever, your home. It's like, how in my home can I make people not more Christ-like, but like closer to the Lord, or feel the presence of God. I'm like, I can create a home of peace. That's something that I can do. Whereas the next person might be a home of worship and joy, and you're bringing a different side of Jesus to people in your hospitality, right? So that first bit, love-based leadership, it takes action. It's not just looking on the sidelines. But secondly, with this too, consider, and I know Jeremy, you do, when we walk with people, it's not, hey, Amy, I'll pray for you. It's like, how do you actually stand in the gap for people? That is love in action, or leading from the heart. If Amy's going through something, it's, oh, I'll pray for you. I'll check in with you in 3 days. No, it's like, hey, Lord, I'm standing in the gap because Amy doesn't feel so good right now. Lord, I lift her to you. Would you speak to her? Would you love on her? And so we're loving on them while also holding them accountable. And that accountability piece is part of loving from the heart as well, right? So just a couple tidbits about how Jesus loved. Is he loved both with the intention of being patient and kind and all that stuff, but also calling people into account to be more like him. It's a delicate balance. I'm sure we've all had times where you're trying to speak truth, right? And you're like, I won't do that again. And God's like, like, who are you trying to please, them or me? So, but what, and the reward of that love-based leadership, I think, really is relationship. Think about the people who you actually respect the most. It's generally those who are willing to do both with you, love on you deeply, also correct and speak truth over you in the long haul journey. And I think that's how our best relationships are made, is when we can offer both. So with that, so we've established, like, love is all, it's influence, motivations come from the heart, our motivations guide a lot of our actions. We can choose whether they're good or bad influence on other people, and our heart influences our why. So what gets in the way? Like, why don't we always lead with love? Wait, like,
Pride?
Pride, yeah, like everything, like everything, but like everything gets in the way. And so this is where we're going to go to your heart's ego. So this is this key concept too. Sienna, do you mind reading Romans 7:22-25?
Sure. I love God's law with all my heart, but there is another power within me that is at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to the sin that is still within me. Oh, what a miserable person am I. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? Thank God. The answer is in Jesus Christ our Lord.
Great. So, we're in, I don't want to say we're in good company, but we're in good company with, say, Paul, who also said, I do not understand what I do, for I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do. This is us probably every day. You gotta do laundry, I don't want to do it, I gotta do this, I don't want to do it. It's the flesh gets in the way. But when it comes to leadership and loving really well as a leader and loving with the heart of Jesus, it goes back to that. It's pride gets in the way. And I think the enemy always wants us to challenge us and go, you should think about yourself. No one else is going to. If you do this for them, who's going to take care of you? Right? It's this, I think really it's pride. It's a heart fueled by self-interest, self-protectionism. And the world is a lot about this type of psychology. We know, protect yourself, have a lot of boundaries. So there's a healthy, but then there's also, I think we can go too far and go, no one cares about me. Why would I love on you if you're not going to give back? It becomes very transactional. Very transactional. And when I think about this, I would think about like give a little, take a lot. I go, this is so backwards from how God challenges us. So for example, I think with tithing, and I go, the world thinks it's so wild that we poof our money away, right? And I'm like, this is, yeah, it is, like, in practice, it seems actually wild. But God says, you test me and see if I will not pour out and render the heavens as you give. We're trusting in God. But there is that, like, are you going to take care of me? Are you going to protect me? Am I going to have enough for payday? blah, 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 blah. I'm sure most people will struggle with that when they tithe. Ideally, not always, and we'll get over that. But that's just an example of how, like, God's like, just trust me. And if people are like, I can't give 10% or whatever because I won't be able to pay my bills. This is the exact thing that goes on. The flesh wants to protect, make sure you're going to be okay. And God's like, do you trust that I've got you and I take care of you? And this isn't a transaction. Although he says he will bless you if you give, right? So, but the adversary seeks to entice us to self-service all of the time. So this is really something for us to be aware of, and which sucks. Because unless maybe a friend tells you or the Lord highlights, you're not going to know if you're worshiping because you're like, oh, this could bring opportunities or what. So it's just interesting. But our heart's ego. Our heart wants to protect. Our heart wants to make sure we're going to be okay. Our heart is looking at, like, what do I need? And to acquire that. This is, I think, very natural. Ever since the Garden of Eden, we've been struggling with this. But what happens is we edge God out. The moment we're looking at our self-interest first, we edge God out. And I'm going to go through this diagram. Mine looks a little bit different. I don't know if yours is going to be on the same page or not. But what does it look like to have a heart out of order? Now, I think we can go through busy phases of our lives. We can go through a week that's busy and feel a little bit discombobulated, right? So let's just play this out and see what this actually looks like. So you'll see a graph here. It says the result of a heart out of order. So what happens when we start kind of looking in? And 3 examples of edging God out. So what does that look like? 1, as an object of your worship. So by putting something else in God's place, can you give some examples of what might be put in God's place?
Relationships.
Relationship. Finance. Sports. Work. So it can be a habit. It could be a person. It could be possessions. It could be an idol. All of these things. And, in Revelation 2:17, Jesus talks to the church in Ephesus and says, you have forsaken my first love. You've done all these great deeds, but you've forsaken my first love. I'm like, man, how quickly we edge God out by putting something in God's place, right? And I think there's probably patterns, like even tonight, I'm like, I'm being such a Martha. I need to be a Mary with you, Jesus, but chairs need to be brought upstairs. And but I know that's an area where I'm like, I'm going to be a Martha. I don't want to be. I want to spend time with Jesus, right? But that's just one example. But over the long haul, weeks and months, things can edge God out from us hearing from him. The second, do you guys all know where we are? Because yours looks a bit different. Okay.
Page 3.
Yeah, the graph,
If you ever do
it didn't all fit on one page.
Oh,
so-
yeah, mine is like super tiny, so it looks like this. So that's why I don't know where you are.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
It's all there, it's just.
So the second one is trusting. Is it page 3? You got it.
I think so.
The blue box.
It's not really graph-like.
Oh, yeah, yours isn't. Okay, oh, it's a super faint gray.
Oh.
Yeah, okay, so edging God out. The second one is as the source of my security. So this can be intellect, your position, performance, possessions, contacts, which are temporary and fallible. And it's so interesting. It's when these things get pulled from you, or when these things are like pulled from under you. That's when you go, oh. Like when I remember, probably Jeremy in the same boat, when your work is like drastically changes and you're like, I had no idea that was such a stabilizing force in my life, and Jesus should have been that. You don't know sometimes until these things kind of get pulled from under you. And so I would say if Satan has a formula for trusting in something other than God, what does he want us to think? He wants us to think self-worth equals performance plus opinions of others. Fair? Performance plus opinions of others. I definitely fall into that all the time. Not cool, but it is what it is. I'm a high achiever. So that performance thing is something I'm really watching and going, nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. Don't want to do that. It's a slow, it's slow and steady. But when things like this get pulled from us, it makes us feel storm-tossed. And because we didn't sometimes even realize that our security was in these things. And that can cause self-doubt and cause anxiety. It puts a lot of people on a spin. but sometimes only when it's taken from us do we realize like, oh, my identity was a lot in that relationship or in this title or in this car. The third is as the audience and authority over my daily work and life story. So to whom are you playing the stage of your life? I think when I set my schedule, so often I have to remind myself my work is not the first thing I should put in my schedule. Like I should not work around my work. I should work around my quiet time. But it's just a hard thing because our work is our livelihood. It's so transactional, and then you put things around it. But like even if I plan, Lord, you know I need to work. You call us to work. That's fun. Work's good. But how can I carve out my schedule so that the first thing I'm putting in there is God time, then community and family time, then my work and everything, right? But I just think this is a hard one because whose praise and affections do I seek daily? Well, if I'm not spending time with the Lord that day, I'm probably only my colleagues, right? So it's just something to think about is on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. Who's your audience? So consider an opera singer who is singing to everyone. Everyone loves it. Everyone stands up except one person. And so the opera singer's manager goes, you did fantastic. Everyone loved it. Standing ovation. And he's disappointed. The opera singer's disappointed. And the manager's like, why? It's like, well, one person didn't stand up. Well, what does one person matter? Well, that was my teacher. Like, so who are you attending to? Like, God can be well pleased with you and everyone else is like, or vice versa. So this is something to be aware when we edge God out. We can put something in his place. We can trust in something other than God. And we can value others as our audience over God. But what does that actually lead to? It expresses itself through what Jeremy said, pride and fear.
Page 4.
Page 4. Okay, so we have a page 4.
Oh, I was smart.
Yep. So can you read out pride, Jeremy?
Oh, wow. An overly high opinion of yourself, exaggerated self-esteem. It says, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. Romans 12, verse 3. Promoting self, doing all the talking, taking all the credit, boasting and showing off, demanding all the attention.
Yeah. I think we all are pretty familiar with what pride does, right? We were all kind of susceptible to it. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart, and the evil person produces evil things, which is often pride. So leaders filled with pride and fear, it's like poison. Often we react when people come at us versus I think someone who has a healthy assessment of who they are and their position in a particular situation is more likely just to respond, take time to respond. So even mind your reactions and just see, are you a little bit curt when people want to challenge you or something like that? People like Jesus, he didn't like snap back all the time. He took his time. He just responded when he had some good parable in mind, right? He didn't always address everything that came at him. I think sometimes we do consider things, or like we do want to respond quickly to like set things right, and like, you know, and yet you're like, yeah. On the other hand, there's this inferior pride, which can result in self-doubt. And inferior pride is where your assessment of self is even lower than God's assessment, but you feel that your assessment is better, right? If God's like, you can do it, and you're like, I can't do it. I'm not able. Right, so I think we struggle with both in different areas. I certainly do. And like at work, they're like, you gotta say I more. You're always we. You're always like clumping everyone together. I'm like, well, I mean, you know, in some ways, it's like I'm embarrassed to take any credit. And I don't think that's healthy, but in other ways, I might need to take less credit, right? So it's such a funny, it's just a funny thing to be aware of. Going, why am I afraid? Well, I'm worried that people are going to think I'm selfish if I do that. And they're like, you don't even have a healthy assessment of like how much you produce at work. You're like, okay. So I hate like individual assessments where you have to write, this is everything I did this year. I suck so bad at that. Thank you for ChatGPT to help. Because, right? Whereas I knew a lot of colleagues have no issues. This is exactly what I did. So, and I think certain cultures too, There's a difference in the way how much you think about yourself versus the we, the royal we. So something to think about. But ultimately, pride leads to promoting self, and then there's also fear. So you are insecure about what's going on when you said other things about God, pride, and then another problem is this fear. So insecure view of the future resulting in self-protectionism. Fear is a gift in itself, but as soon as in the garden when they were like, ooh, like there's a reverence, oh, this tree of life, we shouldn't touch it, or the tree of good and evil, and then they went for it because they were like, oh, what if God doesn't take care of me? And they listened to some of these things. They took the fruit, and we've been dealing with fear for our entire lives, but this is an area where we go, we're worried about being found out, we're worried about being like blamed, we're worried about not having enough, so we hide behind our positions, we hide behind, so for example, like a workaholic, they have fear that if they stop working, they're going to feel emptiness. So they don't necessarily respond sometimes when their family needs help at home because they want that gnawing feeling of emptiness will make them feel like they're not being productive, they're not loved, they fear the future. Another person, they find so much comfort in their position and they fear losing it that they withhold information. I've worked with a lot of people like this. Withhold information, they don't delegate tasks because if I empower Amy and she gets a promotion, oh no, my sense of security is lost. Like we do wild things out of both pride and fear.
Well, they're really both like two sides of the same coin, right? Like, and it made me think of a conversation I had with a life coach that I was seeing a little while back, and she was helping me sort of like plan for a difficult conversation at work, and she just reminded me to like hold your sacred size. So don't puff up and don't shrink down.
Oh, I like
hold
that.
your sacred size. And I think we can really glean lots of wisdom from who God says we are in that, right? Rather than like me figuring out exactly what that is. And like, it also makes me think back to an activity Sienna did at a Bible study a while back of like, basically she got us to kind of like stand in front of this giant piece of paper and like she cut a couple of us out. And she's like, this is the space that God created you to be in this world. You don't have to like work to like fit in somebody else's spot or like shrink down. And so those two ideas really stuck with me and sort of this pride versus fear versus sacred size is sticking out to me right now.
That's
like
great.
It's something that's really grounding to take into like, especially if you have like just a particular event that you're going to do. You're like, okay, I know that this is maybe one of my sore spots. That I'm going into. I'm going to hold my sacred size. Jesus, who do you say I am in this?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want me to do in this?
Yeah.
I will hold that sacred
Yeah.
size.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Does anyone have anything to share on that?
I love that. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah.
Well, I just think of Psalm 139, right, where David, he says, "Test me and know my heart, see if there is anything in me, and lead me in the path of righteousness." That whole idea that like we don't always know, and so it's like I think if we, like you said, if we're walking that line of like needing to know our sacred size, is this pride, is this fear, or is this like, is this confidence in who God says I am? You know, like could just be as simple as praying that prayer, like, Lord, is there anything in me that's pride or fear, or is this, you know?
Yeah.
David had to pray that, which is
Yeah. Well,
So
and
would confidence be the middle of what you're actually looking for?
you're getting ahead of us. Yes. Yes.
He said the word confidence, not me.
Yes. Yes. We will get there.
I'm sorry.
This is great.
This is foreshadowing.
No, this is
all
great.
good, bro.
I just want to share something on fear because fear can often lead to addictive behaviors. OCD, an addiction. I would define ever increasing desire for something that has ever decreasing ability to satisfy. Ever increasing desire for something that has ever decreasing ability to fill or satisfy. So it leads to compulsion. So that's when we bring up that workaholic or your desire to control at work or like I know if I feel like totally out of control, like I hate cleaning, I'm not actually a good cleaner. But when I get like want to redo the pantry and I want to like redo things that like no one can see, then I'm like, you're probably in a yellow mental state. confused. Like if you've seen the spectrum, like this is a sign. Like this ain't good. Because and I just get into go mode. I'm like, what am I doing? And there's two of them where what am I need sleep, right? Or you need and so these addictions, we think that they're gonna produce some relief. Oh, if I do more work tonight, I won't have to do it tomorrow. No, it'll be there tomorrow, right? So it's really playing these games where I'm learning to just sit and watch TV and not do anything else while I'm doing it, right? Just to like sit, but it's hard. So we all have our things. And so you can be addicted to working out. You can be addicted to dating. You can be addicted to all these things, right? Because they'll fill something. But it has a decreasing ability to fill because it's not meant to. But often that's rooted in fear. If I don't do this, I'll never be X. And so if I don't go to prayer meetings, I'll miss the blessing of God. That is fear-based. That is absolutely fear-based, right?
Can you say that quote again? Just one more time.
It's not mine. I don't want to take credit for this. Ever-increasing desire for something that has ever-decreasing ability to fill, satisfy. It's compulsion. I couldn't find it, but I think it was like Spurgeon's mom or someone said this about like sin is anything that can be inherently good, including things that are inherently good, that ultimately elevates its place in our hearts above God. And I was like, so you reading books? No problem. But now if you reading books to the expense of you're never reading your Bible, that can become sin. And it's anything that sears your conscience, anything. So now if you're reading books that are inappropriate, it sears your conscience, that is sin. Books themselves aren't sin, maybe some, but as soon as you start reading certain types of books that would sear your conscience and your ability to see and love God clearly, then it could become sin. So it's similar to addiction, where it's just this, it's edging out God, right? But your habit can be good until it's not good, because it becomes fear-based that something's going to happen if you stop doing it or something like that. So what does this lead to? It leads to separation from God. Why? Because you can become ashamed. Oh, I'm not good enough, or I'm too good. I don't need you. From other people. You're too embarrassed to ask for help. Anyone like that? I've been learning. Right? Right? Like, and I don't know if guys have a harder time asking for help. I mean, I know I have a hard time, but it's like, if I know that I really suck at something, I don't have a problem asking. But it's when I think that I'm actually okay at it and realize you're really not. Like, there's denial here too. That it'll separate you. And then from yourself, we become very sensitive to everything. It also leads to comparison with others. That can lead to discontentment. So we are to compare ourselves not to others, but to how aligned are we to God's plan over our life and what He's called you to do. What He's called Brandon to do is very different from what Donovan needs to do. If Brandon's kicking himself because he's not worshiping on stage, that's why. Like, right? And then also leads to, and comparison leads to anxiety, leads to all sorts of stuff. And then distortion of the truth and false sense of security. We believe these lies that we're safe only if we do this or that, and we might go for short-term results over long-term wins just because of this distortion. I need this now or I won't be okay. So the purpose of this graph is to go, whoa, there's a lot of, when we stop creating room for God to be first, a lot can come from this. Fear, anxiety. From anxiety, we have separation, we have comparison, distortion. I mean, how many people can relate to this even this week? Like, and I think part of the weapon is that we're just awareness, right? And go, enemy, like, back off. I know I'm busy, but like God's gonna still be on His throne. So, on their next page, what I've just got here is just some. It just says warning signs. So we must pay attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift. So consider this dashboard, siren. You're getting your blood pressure checked. I'll just go through this really quickly, but the I factor, how much, how do you respond when you're hangry? Right? Do you often feel like you're more than or less than other people? How does that impact the way that you show up? evaluate which areas of your life are you most self-centered, maybe other areas where you should actually think about yourself more in those situations so you're not being walked over too. So the I factor. The mind factor is I would rather do this myself. I sometimes struggle with this, but the reality is we have what we call seasons of influence. If you look back at your life, I'm sure you're not in the same role today as you were 10 years ago. You could be, but we have seasons of influence. So a true perspective on the Lord would say everything is on loan. I'm not driving any of you. Actually, you are on loan and entrusted to this leadership night. You're not, power might flow through each of us, but it doesn't come from us. Like, that would be a healthy perspective, to think that things are on loan versus they're mine. Like, I don't want you to have this friend because she's mine. And we see this all the time. Girls are a little bit, I think, worse at this, but there's a possessiveness because we're worried about losing something or someone winning over someone. Like, it's silly. And we might withhold information, refuse to empower. Like, there's so much that you're fearing that if you love on people, they're going to get elevated, encouraged, and God forbid you're going to get kicked off your seat. Like, I think everyone does struggle with this, but we're called to like press on and go, you're going to take care of me, God. I'm going to empower because I'm called to be an encourager, right? Like, we are all called to encourage, but this mind, this like fear, anxiety will keep us from elevating other people, right? And then finally, this negative response to feedback. Do we see it as a gift? If we do believe that our gifts, even themselves, are on loan, I think it'd be a lot faster to receive feedback and so on. So ultimately, these are just to kind of help us point the I, my perspective, negativity. We'll stop developing people as leaders when we're fearful and we're anxious. Because we're actually going to want a lot more about other people to make us feel comfort and feel acceptance and feel. So that's the twin dragon of edging God out. But then there's the other side, the heart turnaround. So if you go to concept 3, a heart turnaround. So this is the flipped story. This takes a lot of work. It takes intentionality. Opening up our Bible every day is a habit. It's not an instinct. Hopefully, for some people, it's definitely an instinct. But it takes so much intentionality to keep God first, because everything in your life is going to try and get you to dethrone Him. Even think of a marriage or a family. Like, we have to be so intentional for me to go and carve out time with my parents, to pray for my brother. That's not just like, default, right? It's so much intentionality. But what happens when we're able to do that? Choosing to live with deliberate focus on Jesus will take us from edging God out to exalting God only. So we're going to look at this. This is also a chart, whether you can see it or not. So first is as an object of my worship. So this is a reality. He loves you with no strings attached. Understanding Jesus loves you without your doing, doesn't matter how clean your house is, doesn't matter how you showed up today. He loves you, no strings attached. This belief is stored. This is what you were talking about, Sue, guys. We can get distracted. The enemy wants to come and like take any shiny thing and get us to draw away from worshiping God. Oh, look at this new friend. They're so fun. Sorry, Jesus, I'm going to go hang out with them. Right? Anything, really. But keeping God as the center of our worship. God has given us everything that we need for a godly life. That's what the scripture tells us. So we can trust that we can just keep Him at the center. The second, as a source of security, self-worth, and wisdom. You are God's masterpiece. How many times this year have you told yourself that? I am a masterpiece.
Every day.
Every day.
Could you tell me that?
Imagine like looking in the mirror each day, be like, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, right? Like back off lies. Like, I am a masterpiece. And it's a sense like God has given you value. Your wisdom, your security, all of this is really from Him. And this enables us to walk in that confidence that you talked about. I remember I became a believer in China, and like a year later I was working for the Canadian government. And this guy later said, he was like a boss at the pavilion. He said, Taisa, you walked around here with this confidence that was like, it didn't make sense where it came from. Then I realized you're a Christian, and I think Christians should be put like in a box for a year because they're so exuberant that first year that they believe Christ. Like, I don't know if you're like, and I didn't even realize, but you know, you're like, I got Jesus on my side. You walk different.
Yeah.
Like you act different, and you're like, God's got me. He brought me here. It totally changes the way you enter a room. People are like, what did you drink today? Like, what Jello are you, like, what? You're like,
What Jello?
no, like,
That's so good.
but it totally makes a difference. I remember, like, starting my master's program, because the Lord told me to apply to this school, and I would never have applied my own, like, ever. So when I sat that first day, it was like, oh, I had imposter syndrome. But 10 minutes in, I was like, nope, Taisa, you were literally told to be here. So buckle up, sister. Like, we're in this. And you're supposed to be here. And it was just all right, here I go.
And you drank your Jello,
I drank the Jesus Jello. And it was it's a turnaround when you know that God has placed you. When you know that God has placed you. As He is your sense of security. Can I trust God? Yes. That third one is as the audience and authority over my daily work and life story. The Pharisees wanted so much that their deeds would be seen by man. And God's like, hey, go in your closet and pray. He's my audience. Interestingly, our pastor talked about pomegranates one week. And what's interesting about pomegranates is they were at the top of the temple on these temple pillars. No one could see them. So there's a book called Audience of One, because only God technically could see the pomegranates. Like, why else would they put pomegranates when nobody can see them? And just this idea, and I think the pillars actually meant like worthiness and God sees, something like that. So it's a prophetic thing. But just this idea as like, am I being a pomegranate for Jesus? Or do I want to be seen in plain sight? Like, I think we all struggle with this because there's a natural desire to be seen and be in community. But at the end of the day, it's like, who's my audience? It's God, right? Like, people are obviously going to watch, but who's your primary audience? Let's put it that way. So, because you know what? Your parents aren't going to be, your parents might not be believers. They might not agree with what you're doing, right? They're like, why do you spend all your time at church? Why do you spend all your time serving? You should be home. And you're like, the Lord has guided me to do this. He's my audience. I worship because He's my audience, not because I'm asked to be on a worship team, right? You know. So what does this do? So this is of when we exalt only God. So He's the object of our worship, source of security, self-worth, audience, and authority over our daily work and our life story. And we see, so what is this? How does this express itself? So we look at the life of Jesus and we can see these two things loud and clear. The first side is humility. So can I get someone to read that humility side?
Something to hope for, but never claim. Something to observe in others. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Philippians 2:3. Look out the window, not in the mirror to praise. A kingdom perspective.
Great. And Jeremy.
Confidence.
Woo!
Yeah. Resting assured in God's nature and goodness. Proceeding in faith one step at a time. So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Hebrews 13, verse 6. And then we're promoting others, and we're protecting others.
Is there anything about humility or God-granted confidence that comes up for anyone? Any story or...
I always have a story. I think I really like this looking out the window, not in the mirror. Yeah, I think that's so important in promoting others and protecting others. Because if I look inward, I wouldn't do half the things that God has called me to do.
Yeah.
right? Because I'd be worried about, like, you know, where's this coming from? Where's that coming from? But when I truly get God's perspective, we can love the people that are even hard to love. And so I find that so important, and I really like that. I'm gonna steal that, put that somewhere in my house, looking out the window, not in the mirror.
And this, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, humility I feel too is like, it's more about being able to see ourselves rightly. Like I just had to look up the verse reference because it's hilarious. Numbers 12 verse 3 says, "Now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth." And what's funny about that is that Moses wrote.
Yeah.
So I think it's just that idea of like humility. I think often there's this false humility of like trying to put ourselves down, but like true humility is confidence.
Yeah.
Like, and but it's not confidence in what we can do, it's confidence in God in us. And so it's this like, it's walking that delicate balance. And it's interesting because I think part of what I'm thinking about now too is a big part of healing that I found in healing the heart is like you trace the fruit to the root. And so if you're struggling with pride or you're struggling with not putting God first, it's like, well, what is that? Like you kind of trace down, the fruit is that my priority isn't exalting Jesus in everything. So what's underneath that? It's like, oh, maybe it's because my work is more important, or it's because I valued sleep more than I valued being in the Word, which is, you know, so it's that whole idea of seeing ourselves rightly, and then realizing that how we see ourselves is oftentimes more about the root, the way we live is the fruit.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is so important for all of us because when we think about humility, it's really not being like lowly.
Yeah.
It's and because when I think about Jesus being humble, he never denied the power that he carried. He just knew that the power worked through, or we should know the power works through us, not from us. So, and it's not having a lesser assessment of ourselves, it's like thinking less of ourselves. So it's just an interesting, you know, concept when you think about humility. And then God grounded confidence. I think from this place, you're probably your best self, right? Like you see something, other people are doing good, you're encouraging them. You're not really thinking twice about, like, you're just giving out praise, you're giving out encouragement. You're a good person to be around. When you have God-centered confidence, people want to be around you. Because you're coming from a place of love. It's just literally flowing out of you. Because this is not something that we can ask for or do on our own. Our confidence will fleet. Our situation will come up and be like battered. But God-centered confidence is like people can notice, but they can't put their finger on it. Right? So that's really the types of leaders that I think are really effective. Because we're like, why are they like magnets? So what does this lead to? One, community. So drawing near to God as a basis for our decision making. Anytime God is centered and not edged out and he's exalted only, you want your Bible more, you want to be in community more, you want to pray more, you're like, oh, God's so powerful. It also leads to deep contentment, right? Like you're getting words and instruction over your life on a day-to-day basis, and you're satisfied. So even when things are really hard, you're like, this is from you. Okay, let's go through it together. I don't like this. If we could speed this up, that'd be great, but I'm here for it. If this is, you know, like, it's a different journey where you're not like, you're letting your heart feel through struggle, because I think that's how the Lord teaches us often in experience. He whispers and then sometimes shouts. But this contentment that like, I'm so happy you're with me in this. And then lastly is truth as a basis for decision making. So you operate under that truth that whose am I? God, and God is inherently good. So this is very opposite from the other, right? So I encourage you just to use these two, and you do your check-ins, or like every couple weeks you're looking, going, where am I leaning? Am I experiencing community, contentment, and truth, or am I experiencing more of that separation, anxiety, fear, and that sort of thing?